Super Rugby seems to be having a pretty good year in 2025, folks. The viewing numbers are up on TV in both here in New Zealand and in Australia. The attendances are up. The games are closer than ever before. The number of teams who are competitive, who used to be kind of also rans, has drastically changed. Apart from my Blues down the bottom of the table, it's been a pretty good year. One of the things you got to credit the folks who run Super Rugby with is implementing Super Rugby Fantasy as another kind of engagement tool to get fans on board. I've always liked playing those kind of fantasy games. You get to potentially monitor players that you wouldn't have necessarily even heard of before. You maybe take an interest in games which you might not have ordinarily watched, and you just kind of get a bit of hype up for each week, trying to get your team in a master plan to get the maximum points. But how good is Super Rugby's fantasy product? They kind of got it out in a real hurry. They only just got it out in time for the season, so it did feel like it's a little bit rushed, and there's a few things that I would like to see potentially change next year that we've seen in kind of other fantasy competitions for different sports. But we'll go through what I reckon about it, and you guys can let us know your thoughts. So you pick 15 players, you've got a budget of 100 million, and you don't have to pick substitutes. There's unlimited transfers, and players get points based on, scoring tries, making tackles, breaking tackles, clean breaks, and you lose points for missing tackles and missing conversions and all that kind of stuff. That stuff is all pretty stock standard, and I think the presentation of Super Rugby Fantasy looks pretty nice. It's pretty intuitive to play. There's not really any kind of high hurdles for new users to get over. I think it's pretty. I don't know if my dad could do it, Dad, but most people, I think, if you've played any fantasy sports before, it will not come as any kind of high difficulty product. And if you haven't played fantasy, I think it's pretty straightforward to get to grips with. There are a few things I would like to see change, though, and I don't want to be seen to be just griping, because I think the overall impact of fantasy is a positive. Some things I would like to see changed. The player values and team values are way out of whack. Like, there's technically a limit. Like, there's a $100 million limit on how many players you can buy. I've never hit the limit any one week. And you've got boosters that you can use throughout the season. One of them is limitless. Like, you've got an unlimited budget. You don't need it. The players, you can stack your team with basically every big name player who's in current form and probably still have a little bit of change left over. So they didn't quite get the valuing right. And one thing I would also like to see them potentially change going forward, which might be one that they didn't have time to implement, is just the player values should change throughout the season. Like, you start from week 1, everyone's player values, all the players' values are locked in at week 1. But based on the performances from week 1, if players start getting snapped up, like kind of high-performing players who people didn't maybe think to pick, those guys, the more teams that pick them, their value should go higher because they're in demand. And guys who had a big reputation coming into the start of the season and aren't scoring well in fantasy and people are dropping them from their fantasy team, their values should decrease. The values shouldn't be static. They should be in motion throughout the season based on how many people are picking them, which is the way I've seen it done in other fantasy sports, or just potentially what their kind of average points output is. If they're scoring, if they're the best player in the league, if they're the top of the fantasy league in terms of highest player for points scored, they should be more expensive. That's just how it should be. It kind of makes the game more interesting in terms of how you manage it. Like, if you get in a star player who does well early, instead of getting late on the train when everybody else has already got them, that can make a bit of a difference. Secondly, I feel like the players who don't play shouldn't be locked in. I've only had this happen to me once, but I'm sure it's happened to multiple people. You get to see the team namings, which is cool, and it's got a little different icon as to whether they are playing, whether they are dropped, whether they're on the bench, or whether they're injured. So you can see at a glance, I don't want to pick that guy because he's injured or he's not playing this week or whatever. But if teams make late changes and that player that you picked, which used to be green, doesn't end up playing, if they don't take the field, that player shouldn't be locked in. There was one week for the Chiefs where Tupou was named but was a late scratching, And I looked through all the top teams because I had him as well. I was like, oh, it sucks. I can't change him. But he didn't even take the field. Nobody could change him. So it's an automatic loss of points. That's a real kind of specific one. But if a player is named and there's a scratching and doesn't take the field, you should be able to switch them out. It shouldn't be locked in because the player, if the player takes the field for 1 minute and gets injured and goes off, that's just bad luck. But if the player doesn't take the field, I don't feel like they should be locked in. You should be able to remove that player and replace them with somebody else. Also, some guys playing out of position. This has always been one of the kind of things about fantasy sports, is if you can find a player who's playing in a position which traditionally scores more points than another position, if they're playing out of position, you might be able to get a few kind of sneaky extra points. It probably should change if that player only plays in the position not listed in fantasy, right? Like Cullen Grace is the obvious example. He's listed as a lock in Super Rugby Fantasy. Locks don't score that well compared to loose forwards. Cullen Grace has played every game in the loose forwards, so he probably should have been switched by now, but he's locked in for the entire season as a lock, so he's kind of a little bit of an exploit because he tends to score pretty well compared to some of the other locks. So sometimes it's hard, like guys like Tavatava Nawai legit just play multiple positions. You need to give him one in the game, I understand that, but if it's genuinely he's not being played in that position, like a Cullen Grace example, I feel like they should probably change that. Also, I feel like there's a big emphasis on the attacking players. All the top players in fantasy are all the top try scorers. That's more just a stylistic choice. It might be nice to give some credit to the guys who are big turnover winners or big tacklers. But as it stands, it's basically just you want to pick all the big try scorers in your team. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I just think the game could be balanced a little bit more in favor of some defensive players as well. And also a few little nitpicks. These are small things to be complaining about, but in terms of the UI, it would be nice to see when I'm picking the players who their next opposition is. Because one of the things about fantasy is thinking this team who's the top of the table are playing this team who's the bottom of the table. They should score really well. That should just be front and center. And also, don't let me pick an illegal lineup. There's been times when I've made my picks just looking at how much cash I got to spend and which guys are available. And then it tells me once I've made them all, no, you can't pick those players because you picked too many players from one team. Don't let me go that far in the first place. But that's pretty much a nitpick. Like I said, overall, it is a big plus to have fantasy. They said there's over 70,000 users, which is cracking. I'm sure some people have dropped off, but there's still a lot of very active players. I do think if there was the one change to make, it is absolutely the player and team values is not right for this season. That would need to be changed for next year. It needs to be more of a headache as to how do I squeeze in the perfect allotment of players. Like I really want both these guys, but they're both really expensive. I can only pick one, and I'm going to have to pick a different guy, a B-class guy in that position. You know what I mean? That's the kind of headache you should have. Right now, you can just basically pick whoever you want, and there's no dramas. But yeah, Super Rugby Fantasy, I think it's been going pretty well. If you guys are playing, let me know how you're doing. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.